Sometimes the people we mistake for housekeepers are the very souls sent to heal the wounds money could never touch. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the rest of this journey. The rain came down hard on Queens that night, thick curtains of water beating against the narrow apartment windows. Amara pressed her forehead to the glass, her reflection ghosting back at her. She was 23, a second-year medical student at Columbia, but tonight she wasn't preparing for exams or rotations. Tonight, she was about to step into a life she didn't belong to, a role that wasn't hers to play.
Amara, I'm so sorry.
Her sister Rachel winced, adjusting the ice pack strapped to her swollen ankle on the worn-out couch.
The manager will fire me if I miss this shift. Please, just this once. You know the uniform's in the closet.
Just don't talk too much. Amara turned to her older sister, eyes softening. Rachel had always been the practical one, holding down jobs that kept them afloat after their parents passed away. Amara, the dreamer, buried in anatomy books and hospital corridors, carried a different kind of weight. Tonight, she would carry her sister's. She slipped into Rachel's uniform, a crisp navy blue dress with white trim, the name tag clipped neatly. Rachel. It didn't matter that Amara's textbooks sat unopened on the table or that her body begged for rest after 2 consecutive night shifts at the pediatric ward. Family came first. Always. The storm showed no mercy as she hurried across the soaked streets, catching the late train bound for Westchester. By the time she stepped off at the deserted station, the world felt like it belonged to another planet. Wealthy estates stretched out in the darkness, their high gates shining wet under the streetlights. Amara's cheap umbrella flipped inside out with a sudden gust, drenching her hair and the collar of her uniform. She let out a quiet laugh, half out of nerves, half out of disbelief at the absurdity of her situation. At the gate of the Harrington estate, a sprawling mansion of cold stone and endless windows, Amara hesitated. The kind of house she was about to walk into was one she had only seen in magazines, silent, fortress-like, with its own kind of loneliness hiding behind every marble wall. She pressed the intercom.
Rachel?
A man's voice, low, clipped.
Yes,
she whispered, though her name was not Rachel. The gate swung open with mechanical precision. The mansion loomed ahead, its silhouette lit by flashes of lightning. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and rain-soaked roses from the garden. It was quiet. Too quiet. Then he appeared. Daniel Harrington. The kind of man people recognized from headlines, but never from warm memories. Once the head of a vast investment firm, now a widower retreating from the world, his figure was tall, almost severe, wrapped in a gray sweater that matched the storm clouds. His eyes, though striking, carried a weight that pressed down on anyone who met them. "You're late," he said, though not unkindly, just factual, as if time was the only currency left he respected. Amara lowered her gaze, murmuring an apology. She clutched the cleaning caddy Rachel had prepared, but before she could move, a small sound broke the silence. From the far end of the hallway, a little girl emerged, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Her hair clung damply to her cheeks, and her eyes, wide, fearful, almost translucent in their light, fixed on Amara like she had never seen anyone outside her father before. "Lily." Daniel's tone softened slightly, though he didn't move. "Go back upstairs." But Lily didn't. She stood frozen, staring. Amara's heart clenched. She recognized the look instantly. It was the same one she saw in the hospital wards where children clung to shadows of mothers and fathers. Lily was maybe 6, maybe 7, but in her silence was a whole dictionary of loss. Careful, Amara crouched down and reached into the pocket of her apron. She pulled out a square of tissue, folded it once, twice, then again, her fingers moving with the delicate memory of childhood evenings when her father used to teach her origami at their kitchen table. Slowly, the tissue transformed into a fragile crane. She extended it toward Lily, her smile gentle.
"Do you know what this is?"
she asked softly. Lily's lips parted, but no sound came. Still, her small hand lifted, hesitant, accepting the paper bird. Her tiny fingers traced the wings, and for the briefest moment, her lips curled into a smile, so faint, so fleeting, but enough to shatter the weight in the hallway. Daniel, watching from the shadows, felt something stir that he had long buried. It was the soundless cracking of a wall he had built brick by brick since the night he lost his wife. "Time for bed, Lily," he said again, but his voice trembled just slightly. The child nodded, clutching the crane and her rabbit close to her chest as she turned to climb the stairs. Amara rose slowly, catching Daniel's eyes for a fleeting second. His gaze was unreadable, half suspicion, half something unspoken. She turned away, busying herself with her duties. But in the quiet echo of the mansion, the sound of Lily's soft giggle, her first in weeks, lingered like a fragile melody. And Daniel, alone in the doorway, realized he wasn't sure if he was more unsettled by the stranger in his house or by the warmth she had brought with her in less than 5 minutes. The next evening, the mansion in Westchester seemed just as cold and vast, yet Amara felt a subtle shift when she arrived. Something invisible lingered in the air since last night. The memory of Lily's hesitant smile, the way her tiny hands had cradled the paper crane. Amara had seen hundreds of smiles in the children's ward at Columbia, but this one clung to her heart like a fragile light refusing to go out. Normally, housekeepers were expected to move quietly, unseen, their presence erased as soon as the floors gleamed and the silverware shone. Yet as Amara carried her cleaning supplies through the kitchen corridor, Daniel's voice called out, stopping her in her tracks. "Stay!" She turned, startled. Daniel stood at the threshold of the dining room, his posture impeccable, though his sweater looked carelessly thrown on, as if he hadn't bothered with appearances in months. His eyes flicked toward the long mahogany table, set for 2. Amara blinked. "Sir?" "Dinner," he said simply. "You'll join us." For a moment, she thought she'd misheard. Guests didn't dine with men like Daniel Harrington. Not students moonlighting as maids, not women who came soaked from Queens with second-hand uniforms and borrowed name tags. But his tone left no room for refusal. Amara wiped her damp palms against her apron and followed him inside. The dining room stretched with intimidating elegance. Chandeliers overhead. A row of tall windows battered by raindrops, crystal glasses catching the flicker of candlelight. Yet at one end of the table sat Lily, her rabbit perched on her lap, staring at the empty seat beside her. Amara lowered herself into the chair. Lily's eyes widened, as though Amara's presence at the table was some kind of miracle. The little girl leaned close, whispering so softly Amara almost missed it. "Hi, Miss Amara." The words were faint but clear, 2 syllables threaded with trust. Daniel froze, his fork stilled in midair. For weeks, perhaps months, his daughter had spoken almost nothing, choosing silence as her only companion. Yet now, in the presence of a stranger, she offered speech like a fragile gift. Amara smiled gently. "Hi, Lily." The meal itself was simple: roasted chicken, steamed vegetables, bread warm from the oven. Yet every bite felt weighty under the unspoken tension. Daniel watched his daughter, watched Amara as though trying to solve a puzzle that unsettled him. His eyes, steel blue, cautious, softened each time Lily turned toward Amara, seeking her attention. At one point, Lily lifted her fork and dropped a carrot onto Amara's plate with solemn importance. "For you," Amara laughed softly, touched.
Thank you, sweetheart.
She took a bite, exaggerating her delight until Lily giggled. That sound, clear, bubbling, genuine, rolled through the dining hall like music breaking into silence. Daniel looked away, his jaw tightening. The sound reminded him of another woman's laugh, his wife's, the one he had buried beneath grief and the walls of this mansion. But he couldn't ignore the truth blooming in front of him. His daughter had not laughed in months, and now, because of this stranger, she had. After dinner, Amara offered to help Lily upstairs. Daniel hesitated at first, but then gave a small nod. The child's room was large but stark, as though decorated by catalogs rather than love. The ceiling stretched tall, the windows dressed in heavy curtains, and the bed was too big for such a small frame. Yet on the nightstand rested the paper crane, its wings carefully smoothed, as if it had become Lily's talisman overnight. Amara knelt beside the bed.
Would you like me to read to you?
Lily nodded eagerly, handing her a worn book about forest animals. As Amara read, her voice low and soothing, Lily clutched the rabbit tighter, eyelids fluttering with each page turned. Daniel appeared at the doorway, unseen. He leaned against the frame, watching. He had spent countless nights standing in that same spot, helpless as his daughter tossed and turned, plagued by nightmares and silence. Yet tonight, she lay still, calm, the rhythm of Amara's voice weaving peace into her breathing. When Amara closed the book, Lily whispered, "Stay." Her small hand reached for Amara's sleeve. Amara brushed back the child's hair gently.
I'll be here until you fall asleep.
Within minutes, Lily's breathing deepened, the stuffed rabbit tucked securely beneath her chin. The paper crane rested beside her pillow, wings pointed toward the ceiling. Daniel's throat tightened as he watched. He had not seen his daughter fall asleep so easily since before the accident. For the first time, the house did not feel like a tomb. It felt like something alive, something tender. He stepped back before Amara noticed, retreating to his study, but not before his heart betrayed him with a flicker of gratitude he refused to name. Later, as Amara gathered her things, Daniel's voice came quietly from the shadows of the staircase.
Thank you.
Amara paused, surprised.
For what, sir?
For dinner, he said, though they both knew it was more than that. She offered a small nod, her eyes steady.
You're welcome.
The storm had quieted when she stepped outside, the air cool and damp. As she walked down the long driveway, Amara realized her life had shifted in a way she hadn't expected. She had come as a substitute maid, nothing more. Yet tonight, for a brief dinner, she had been something else, an anchor for a child, a reminder to a grieving man that laughter still existed. And in her chest, beneath the weight of exhaustion, a fragile hope began to glow. For the next few days, Amara thought Daniel would dismiss her, send her away with a cold nod of finality. She had fulfilled one night's duty, after all, standing in for her injured sister. Yet when Rachel's ankle remained too swollen to heal quickly, and the agency began pressing for coverage, Daniel himself made the request. "I want her back," he said over the phone. His voice was clipped but firm, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Rachel stared at Amara, baffled.
He asked for you by name?
Amara hesitated.
Not my name. He thinks I'm you.
Rachel sighed, guilt etched across her face.
Amara, I never wanted to drag you into this. You're a med student, not a housemaid.
But Amara only smiled faintly.
Maybe this is temporary. Maybe it's more than that. But if Lily needs me, I can't just walk away.
And so, with her textbooks weighing heavy in her backpack, Amara boarded the evening train back to Westchester. Each trip stretched her thin, days spent in Columbia's labs, nights spent in a mansion haunted by silence and a child's fragile hope. She ran on little more than coffee and sheer willpower, yet something in her refused to let go. Inside the Harrington estate, Lily was waiting at the window as if counting the minutes until Amara arrived. When she saw her step through the doorway, she rushed forward, rabbit in hand, the paper crane still tucked into her nightgown pocket. "Miss Amara!" Daniel, who had been sipping tea in the library, looked up sharply at the sound. His daughter's voice carried a brightness he had almost forgotten existed. He closed the book in his lap without finishing the page, pretending indifference, though the corners of his lips tugged against his will. That evening, as Amara cleaned the upstairs study, Lily crept after her, balancing on tiptoe to hand over a pack of glow-in-the-dark stars she had found in a forgotten drawer.
"These help with the dark,"
Amara explained gently, peeling one sticker and pressing it against the ceiling above Lily's bed. Piece by piece, they arranged a constellation, glowing faintly under the lamplight. "Now, when you're afraid, just look up. Your mom is still watching from the stars." Lily's eyes glistened. She didn't ask questions. She only whispered, "Thank you," before curling up under the soft green glow that soon filled her ceiling like a private galaxy. From the hallway, Daniel watched again. He had told himself countless times that grief was best handled by silence, that children should be shielded from false comfort. Yet seeing Lily sleep peacefully beneath Amara's stars, his chest tightened with a mixture of shame and awe. He had tried for months to coax his daughter back into life, and in a few days, this woman had opened doors he hadn't known existed. The days bled into a fragile rhythm. Amara woke before dawn to attend classes, memorizing pharmacology terms while eating cold toast on the subway. She worked hospital shifts where children cried through IV insertions and mothers clutched her hand like she carried answers she didn't yet know. Then, with feet blistered and eyes stinging, she traveled to the mansion, where Lily's shy smile awaited like the purest reward. Daniel noticed her exhaustion. He saw it in the way her hands trembled when she carried tea, in the faint shadows beneath her eyes. Yet she never complained, never asked for more than her modest pay. Instead, she offered advice, unasked but precise, in a voice softened by care.
"Mr. Harrington,"
she said one evening after Lily was asleep, "I know it's not my place, but have you considered therapy? For Lily, and maybe for you?" Daniel stiffened instantly. His life had been governed by control, by never showing weakness. Therapy was for others, not for him. But Amara's tone carried no judgment, only quiet professionalism. "At Columbia, we study how grief can manifest in children," she continued carefully. "Lily's silence. It's not defiance. It's her way of surviving. But healing doesn't happen in silence alone." Daniel's eyes narrowed, instinctively defensive. Yet behind the steel, a flicker of recognition glowed. He dismissed her with a curt nod, but the seed had been planted. Later that night, as he sat alone in his office, he stared at the rain streaking the windows and admitted to himself, for the first time, that maybe she was right. Still, he couldn't shake the suspicion gnawing at him. Who was this woman really? A maid with calloused hands, or a medical student with unspoken ambitions? Did she care for Lily out of genuine love? Or was she angling for a place in a fortune she could never dream of? Daniel closed his eyes, remembering his late wife's laughter echoing in these same halls. He had built walls so high that even his daughter couldn't scale them. And now, a stranger with borrowed name tags and tired eyes was dismantling those walls brick by fragile brick. It unsettled him. It terrified him. But most of all, it gave him hope. That night, as Amara packed her bag, she stumbled slightly, her legs weak from the long day. Daniel instinctively stepped forward, catching her arm before she fell. For a brief second their eyes locked, hers weary but luminous, his guarded but searching. "You're working yourself to death," he muttered. She managed a tired smile. "That's what med school feels like." Something in his chest cracked then, a faint tremor of admiration he didn't want to name. When she finally left, Lily was already asleep beneath her glowing constellation. Daniel lingered at the doorway, whispering to the dark, Maybe this isn't temporary." The Harrington mansion had grown less silent in recent weeks, but grief has a way of hiding in corners, waiting to be stirred again. For Daniel, the nights were still long and filled with memories of a laughter that once echoed through these very halls. For Lily, questions had begun to form in her small heart, questions no father could stop forever. One evening, as Amara tucked her in beneath the faint glow of the stars they had stuck to the ceiling, Lily's voice broke the fragile calm. "Miss Amara, where's Mommy?" The words pierced the room like glass shattering. Amara froze, the book slipping slightly in her hands. She glanced at Daniel, who stood just outside the door, his shoulders rigid, his face unreadable. Amara's heart ached. She was no stranger to grief. She had lost her father to illness when she was still in high school. She remembered the suffocating silence, the questions that never had answers. She also remembered what had helped. Not lies, not avoidance, but gentle truth wrapped in hope. She set the book aside and stroked Lily's hair. "Sweetheart, your mom is in the stars now. You see them every night above you. She still watches, still loves you, just from a different place." Lily's eyes glistened, her little hands clutching the stuffed rabbit tighter. "Does she miss me?" Amara swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "Every day. And she's so proud of you." From the doorway, Daniel turned away, his chest heavy with emotions he had buried too deep. He wanted to interrupt, to stop this conversation that felt like reopening a wound he had spent years stitching shut. But something in Amara's voice, steady, tender, held him still. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep beneath her paper crane and glowing stars, Amara lingered in the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water, her hands trembling faintly. "You had no right," Daniel's voice cut through the silence. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, eyes burning with restrained anger. "No right to what?" "To fill her head with stories, to speak of things you don't understand." Amara held his gaze, her own eyes glistening but firm. "I do understand, Mr. Harrington. I lost my father when I was 16. Silence nearly broke me. What Lily needs isn't avoidance. It's reassurance that love doesn't die with the body." Daniel's jaw clenched, his fists curling. He wanted to argue, to insist that Amara was trespassing into wounds she couldn't possibly grasp. Yet beneath his anger was the sharp sting of recognition. She wasn't wrong. He was the one hiding behind silence. The standoff ended not with more words, but with exhaustion. Amara excused herself to gather cleaning supplies, but as she turned, her knees buckled slightly. Fever burned her skin, the product of too many sleepless nights and long commutes. Daniel's reflexes caught her arm before she fell. His anger faltered as he felt the heat radiating from her skin. "You're sick." "It's nothing," she murmured, her lips pale. He guided her gently to the couch, his hand at her back. "It's not nothing. You can barely stand." Amara leaned into the cushions, tears pricking her eyes, not from pain, but from the weight of being seen. She hadn't allowed herself vulnerability in years. Losing her father, caring for Rachel, and working herself ragged had left no space for weakness. Yet here she was, trembling under the gaze of a man who had once seemed made of stone. Daniel disappeared briefly, returning with a blanket and a glass of water. He sat across from her, his expression softened in a way she had never seen. "You said you lost your father," he said quietly. Amara nodded. "He was a paramedic. He taught me how to fold cranes during his night shifts. He used to say that every crane carried a wish. The last one he made for me was for courage." Her voice broke, but she forced a smile. "That's why I'm in medicine. To give what he gave." Daniel lowered his gaze, the memories of his wife pressing heavily against his ribs. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine that maybe Amara's presence wasn't intrusion. It was understanding. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with two lives scarred by loss, yet still beating toward something fragile and new. When Amara finally drifted into a fevered sleep, Daniel sat back, watching her breathe. For so long he had believed that letting anyone in meant betrayal to the memory of his wife. But tonight, watching this young woman, too selfless for her own good, he felt the smallest crack in the armor he had worn for years, and though he would never admit it aloud, he was grateful. The Harrington estate had begun to breathe differently. For weeks, the cold corridors were softened by small bursts of laughter, the quiet joy of a child finding her voice again. Daniel noticed it in Lily's lighter steps, in the way she no longer clutched her rabbit with desperation, but carried it casually, as if it were simply a friend instead of her shield. And he noticed it in himself. He was reading again, slowly, cautiously, books his wife once loved. He was eating more than a single plate of food at night. He was, against every wall he had built, allowing warmth to slip back in. That warmth had a name: Amara. But warmth, Daniel reminded himself, could also burn. It happened on an afternoon when the rain had cleared and sunlight streamed through the wide windows of the sitting room. Amara was humming softly as she stacked clean linens, Lily trailing after her with paper cranes in hand. The house, for once, felt almost ordinary, alive. Then the doorbell rang. Daniel answered it himself, expecting a delivery. Instead, two representatives from the housekeeping agency stood on the marble steps, clipboards in hand, crisp uniforms declaring their authority. "Routine inspection, Mr. Harrington," one of them announced politely. "We've had reports of substitute staff being used without clearance. We'll need to verify personnel." Daniel's brows knit. "That shouldn't be an issue. Rachel has been on duty." The man flipped his clipboard. "Rachel Morgan, yes. Can we speak to her?" Before Daniel could respond, Amara stepped into view, wiping her hands on her apron. The name tag glinted under the chandelier. Rachel. The inspector's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" For one terrifying moment, Amara hesitated. She could feel Daniel's gaze drilling into her back. Her heart pounded as she whispered, I'm Rachel." But the older inspector shook his head, consulting his file. "No. Rachel Morgan is 30. This is not her." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Daniel's voice was ice. "Explain. Now." Amara's throat closed. Her hands shook as she pulled the tag from her chest. "It's true. I'm not Rachel. My name is Amara Morgan. Rachel is my sister. She sprained her ankles, and I came to cover for her so she wouldn't lose her job. I never meant to deceive you, Mr. Harrington. I only wanted to help." Her words poured out in a rush, each one thinner than the last. She glanced toward Lily, whose wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. The inspectors scribbled notes, indifferent to the storm brewing inside the house. "We'll be reporting this violation. Your account will be reviewed, Mr. Harrington. Good day." With that, they turned and left,
their shoes tapping against the stone steps until the echo vanished. Inside, the mansion fell into an awful stillness. Daniel's jaw tightened, his chest rising and falling with restrained fury. "You lied," he said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut. Amara's eyes brimmed with tears. "I didn't lie to take advantage of you. You entered my home under false pretenses. You pretended to be someone else. Do you know what that means, Amara?" Her voice trembled. "I know how it looks, but every moment with Lily was real. I care for her. I care for both of you." Daniel turned away, as though even looking at her was a betrayal of his pride. "Enough!" Lily, clutching her rabbit and paper cranes, ran forward, her little voice breaking. "No, Miss Amara, don't go!" Daniel froze, but his hand clenched into a fist. He had sworn to protect his daughter from lies, from manipulation, from the cruelty of a world that had already taken too much. In his mind, Amara's deception, even one born of kindness, was a violation too deep to excuse. "Go," he said, the words sharp and final. Amara's tears spilled. She knelt before Lily, hugging the child tightly. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Remember the stars. Remember your mom is always watching." Lily sobbed, clinging desperately. "Don't leave me!" But Daniel pulled her gently away, his own heart splintering even as he hardened his face. Amara rose slowly, her body trembling, her eyes meeting Daniel's one last time. "I never wanted your money. I only wanted to give her hope. Believe what you want of me, but please, don't let her think this was her fault." And then she was gone, her footsteps echoing down the hall like a funeral march. The door closed behind her with a final, suffocating thud. The mansion was silent again, too silent. The laughter that had begun to grow here was extinguished in an instant, replaced by Lily's cries muffled against her father's chest. Daniel held his daughter, his face carved in stone. But inside, for the first time in years, he felt not just grief, but guilt. The Harrington mansion had returned to silence, but this silence was different, no longer just the emptiness of grief, but the hollow echo of something torn away too soon. Daniel sat alone in his study, the curtains drawn against the winter dusk. He had once told himself that solitude was safer, that silence protected what little remained of his heart. Yet tonight, the silence mocked him. Every shadow in the house whispered the same truth. Amara was gone, and Lily felt it most. For days, she refused to eat more than a few bites. She clutched her stuffed rabbit so tightly its seams began to fray. At night, Daniel would find her awake, staring at the faint glow of the plastic stars Amara had pasted to her ceiling. Sometimes he heard her muffled sobs, whispering Amara's name into the darkness. "Daddy," she said one evening, her small voice hoarse from crying. "Did I do something wrong? Is that why Miss Amara left?" The question sliced through him like a blade. He gathered her into his arms, holding her closer than he had in months. "No, sweetheart, you did nothing wrong." "Then why won't she come back?" Daniel had no answer. He stroked her hair, his jaw locked against the tide of regret. "Because of me," he thought bitterly. "Because I pushed her away." He tried to reason with himself. Amara had lied. She had pretended to be someone she was not. In his world, deception was dangerous, intolerable, and yet each time he replayed the scene, he couldn't ignore the tears in her eyes, the way she had spoken not of money or gain, but of Lily's happiness. She had never once asked for more than the role she borrowed. She had given herself freely to his daughter, asking nothing in return, and he had thrown her out. The house reflected his choice. The air seemed colder, the walls harsher.
Even the chandeliers, once warm with candlelight, glared down like judgment. Daniel prowled through the rooms at night, restless, haunted by echoes of laughter that had briefly returned only to vanish. In the kitchen, he found Lily attempting to fold tissues the way Amara once had. Her small fingers bent the paper clumsily, leaving creases without shape. When the fragile crane collapsed in her hands, she buried her face in the rabbit and began to cry. Daniel knelt beside her, fumbling with the paper. His large hands, built for contracts and signatures, could not manage delicate folds. "I'll help," he murmured, though the attempt ended in a wrinkled mess. Lily looked at him with eyes too old for her years. "You don't know how." The words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they reminded him of everything he had failed to give. That night, sleep would not come. He sat at his desk, staring at the old photograph of his wife, her smile forever frozen in a frame. "Emily," he whispered, "what am I doing to her? To us?" The truth pressed in relentlessly. It wasn't Amara's deception that had shattered the fragile peace. They could have spoken through that. It was his pride, his fear of being vulnerable again, that had closed the door. And Lily was paying the price. The days bled together. Meals went untouched. Laughter remained absent. Even the servants moved more quietly, as if the house itself demanded mourning. One evening, Daniel returned early from the city. He found Lily curled on the staircase, asleep with her rabbit and the crumpled remains of paper birds scattered around her. He lifted her gently, carrying her to bed. As he tucked her in, she stirred and whispered in half-sleep, "Miss Amara." Daniel pressed his lips together, his chest aching. For the first time in years, he admitted what he had refused to face. Wealth could not heal this wound. He could buy the finest tutors, the rarest toys, the grandest houses, but none of it replaced the warmth Lily had found in Amara's presence. He had driven away the only light that had begun to thaw their world. Standing at the window, Daniel stared into the darkness beyond the estate. His reflection in the glass was not that of the powerful man the world admired, but of a father who had failed his child, of a man trapped by fear. And beneath that reflection, a seed of realization began to grow. If he truly wanted to protect Lily, he needed to face his own walls. He needed to confront not only Amara's absence, but his own failure to believe in compassion when it was right before him. For now, the house remained cold. But in the cold, Daniel's heart began to stir, restless with the knowledge that something precious had slipped through his hands. And perhaps if he found the courage, it wasn't too late to bring it back. Westchester's autumn had settled into its muted chill, leaves carpeting the sidewalks in shades of gold and rust. Daniel drove into the city one gray Saturday morning, his thoughts heavy, his purpose simple: run errands, distract himself, and return before the weight of the house consumed him again. But fate has a way of redirecting even the most controlled plans. Traffic forced him to detour through Morningside Heights, near Columbia's sprawling campus. As he eased past a row of aging brownstones, his attention caught on a crowd gathered outside a modest brick building. A weathered sign above the door read, "Columbia Community Children's Clinic." Daniel slowed. His eyes narrowed. Through the window pane, he glimpsed a familiar figure, dark hair pulled neatly back, her posture straight despite exhaustion. Amara. She was kneeling beside a little girl in a hospital gown, a child no older than 8, her skin pale and her eyes clouded with fatigue. The girl's frail arms bore the bruised marks of chemotherapy. Amara held the girl's hand with such tenderness that Daniel felt something in his chest shift violently. Her voice, though muffled by the glass, carried a calm rhythm, as if her words themselves had healing power. She adjusted the girl's blanket, whispered something that coaxed a small smile, then produced, of all things, a paper crane from her pocket. The child clutched it, her smile trembling but real. Daniel froze, his breath caught in his throat. This was not deception. This was not manipulation. This was Amara in her truest form. A woman who gave without expecting anything in return, who carried her own scars yet still poured herself into others. For weeks he had convinced himself she had entered his home under false pretenses, that her kindness was nothing more than a mask. But now, watching her in the humblest of places, surrounded not by marble walls but peeling paint and crowded waiting chairs, he realized the truth. Amara's compassion was not an act. It was her essence. He pulled the car over, unable to drive away. His hand gripped the steering wheel, his chest heavy with regret. He remembered Lily's cries, the paper cranes abandoned on the stairs, the glow-in-the-dark stars that now seemed to mock his pride. He had thrown out the one person who had managed to breathe life back into his daughter. Inside, Amara rose and guided the little girl back to her weary mother. She didn't leave immediately. Instead, she stayed, speaking softly to the mother about medication schedules, side effects, encouragement. Her tone was patient, authoritative, not the voice of a maid, but of someone born to heal. Daniel's throat tightened. He had judged her by the uniform she wore, by the borrowed name tag without ever seeing the person within. And in doing so, he had repeated the very cycle of dismissal he claimed to despise. When Amara finally stepped outside, the afternoon air caught her hair, the sun framing her face in gold. She was tired, yes, but she looked alive in a way he hadn't seen before. She didn't notice him at first. She was too busy tucking a notebook of medical notes under her arm, adjusting her backpack with practiced motions. "Amara?" he called, his voice breaking the distance. She froze. Slowly, she turned, her eyes widening when she saw him. Her guard snapped up immediately. "Mr. Harrington," she said carefully, her voice cool. "What are you doing here?" He faltered, words strangling in his throat. He had faced boardrooms of ruthless executives without blinking, but now, under her gaze, he felt stripped bare. "I didn't know you volunteered here." "It's part of my rotation," she said flatly. "Community pediatrics." Her tone was professional, distant. Gone was the warmth she had once offered so freely. He had burned that bridge. Daniel stepped closer, his voice lowering. "I saw you with that little girl. You were extraordinary." Amara's eyes flickered, softening just slightly before hardening again. Compassion isn't extraordinary. It's basic humanity, something people with power often forget. The words landed like a strike. He swallowed, guilt thick in his chest. "I misjudged you." "You didn't just misjudge me," she replied, her voice trembling now, though not with fear, with hurt. "You humiliated me. You made me feel like my only worth was in a lie I never wanted to tell. And worst of all, you made Lily believe I'd abandoned her." Her words cut deeper than any corporate rival ever could. Daniel felt them settle in his bones, sharp and unrelenting. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice unsteady. "I see that now." Amara shook her head. "Words are easy. What Lily needs and what I need is not another promise. It's proof. And until then, Mr. Harrington, stay away." She turned, walking briskly down the block, her figure swallowed by the city's bustle. Daniel remained frozen, his hands trembling, his heart aching with a mix of shame and determination. He had built an empire by mastering control. But control meant nothing here. If he wanted to earn Amara's forgiveness, and more importantly, Lily's trust, he would have to tear down the walls he had spent years hiding behind. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something stronger than grief, stronger than fear. Resolve. The drive back to Westchester was long, but Daniel barely noticed the passing miles. His mind replayed every word Amara had spoken outside the clinic, her voice steady, her eyes filled with hurt. You made Lily believe I'd abandoned her. That wound, more than anything, cut the deepest. He had sworn to protect his daughter from abandonment, from grief too heavy for a child. And yet, his own actions had forced her to feel it all over again. By the time he reached the estate, night had fallen. Lily was waiting at the window, her rabbit tucked under one arm, her face pale and tired. She had been waiting every evening, as though Amara might walk back through the door. When she saw only her father's car, her shoulders slumped. "Daddy," she whispered as he tucked her into bed. "Do you think Miss Amara forgot about us?" Daniel's chest tightened. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "No, sweetheart. She didn't forget. I made a mistake. But I'm going to fix it." She blinked up at him with weary hope. "How?" That was the question that haunted him as he sat awake long into the night. For years, Daniel had solved problems with money, contracts, and influence. But this was different. Amara's heart could not be bought. It had to be earned. The next morning, he made a call. Not to his lawyers, not to his board members, but to Rachel. "Mr. Harrington?" Rachel's voice was wary, as though bracing for reprimand. "It's Daniel," he said. "I need to speak with Amara." "Please." There was a long pause before Rachel sighed. "She doesn't want to see you. She's been hurt enough." "I know," he admitted quietly. "And she's right to feel that way. But Rachel, she gave my daughter something no one else could. If I don't try to make this right, I'll lose more than just her." Rachel's tone softened. "Words won't be enough this time. Amara's stronger than she looks, but she's been carrying too much for too long. If you want her back in Lily's life, you'll have to show her, not just say it." Daniel nodded to himself. "Then that's what I'll do." For days, he planned, not a grand gesture, but something true. He remembered the small details, the paper cranes, the glowing stars, the way Amara's eyes lit up when she spoke of her father's courage. He realized that what she valued most wasn't luxury. It was presence, sincerity, and love. When Lily's birthday approached, Daniel knew what he had to do. In years past, he had hired event planners to design extravagant parties, complete with performers and gifts stacked higher than the child herself. But Lily had never smiled at those gatherings. She had only clung to her rabbit, waiting for the moment she could retreat to her room. This year would be different. Daniel decorated the house himself. He strung up simple balloons, ordered a modest cake with pink frosting, and even attempted to fold paper cranes, though his came out crooked and lopsided. He arranged them around the table anyway, determined to honor the joy Amara had brought into their lives. When the day arrived, Lily's eyes widened at the sight. "It looks like Miss Amara's cranes." Daniel smiled faintly. "Yes, sweetheart. She taught me. I'm still learning." Rachel arrived that afternoon, holding a wrapped box. Beside her walked Amara. Her steps were cautious, her expression guarded. Lily squealed, running to her with open arms. "You came!" Amara knelt, embracing the child tightly, tears already pricking her eyes. "Of course I came. I wouldn't miss this for the world." Daniel watched from a few steps away, his heart pounding. He approached slowly, his voice quiet but clear. "Amara, before anything else, I owe you an apology. A real one." She stood, her chin lifted slightly. "I'm listening." He took a deep breath. "I was wrong. You stepped into my house under your sister's name, yes. But everything you gave my daughter was real. And instead of seeing your heart, I saw only a mistake. I let my pride blind me. I hurt you, and I hurt Lily. I drove away the only light we had. His voice trembled, the mask of control cracking. I can't undo what I did. But I want to make it right, not with words, by proving every day that I can be better. For Lily, for you. The room was still. Amara's eyes glistened, but she didn't answer right away. She looked at Lily, who clutched her hand tightly, silently begging her to stay. Then she looked back at Daniel. You've built your whole life on walls, Mr. Harrington, she said softly. If you want me to believe you, then those walls have to come down. Not just once, not just for today. Always. Daniel nodded, his eyes unwavering. Then that's what I'll do, one brick at a time. The candles were lit. Lily blew them out, her laughter ringing through the house like the sound of healing. For the first time in years, the Harrington mansion felt less like a prison and more like a home. And for Amara, though the wound of betrayal still lingered, the sincerity in Daniel's eyes stirred something she hadn't felt in weeks, the possibility of forgiveness. The morning of Lily's birthday dawned bright and crisp, sunlight spilling through the mansion's tall windows, as if the house itself longed to shake off its shadows. For the first time in years, Daniel had risen early, not for a conference call or a stockholders' meeting, but to tape balloons along the banister, to set out paper plates on the dining table, to place his awkwardly folded paper cranes in a circle around the cake. He worked quietly, sleeves rolled up, more nervous than he could remember being in decades of corporate life. A boardroom of investors he could face with steel composure, but the thought of Amara's eyes, watching, measuring if he was sincere, made his hands tremble as he tied ribbons. By mid-afternoon, the house had changed. It was no longer a mausoleum of marble and silence. There were pastel balloons drifting above the chandelier, streamers across the walls, a table set with a modest pink cake that read, "Happy Birthday, Lily." And then came the knock at the door. Daniel opened it to find Rachel, smiling gently, and beside her, Amara. She wore a simple dress, her hair pinned back neatly, but her presence lit the doorway more than any decoration. Her eyes were cautious, but not cold. "Happy birthday," she said warmly to Lily, who darted forward and wrapped her arms around Amara's waist. "I knew you'd come," Lily beamed, her face alight with a joy Daniel hadn't seen since before his wife's passing. The three of them gathered in the dining room. Lily clapped at the balloons, laughing at Daniel's clumsy paper cranes. "Daddy made these," she exclaimed proudly, showing Amara. Amara picked one up, her lips curling into a soft smile. "They're perfect," she whispered, though they were crooked and bent. She looked at Daniel then, her gaze softer than it had been in weeks. The small celebration began. They ate cake, sang the birthday song, and watched Lily tear into her few gifts: books, a doll, and a telescope Daniel had chosen after remembering Amara's words about the stars. Lily squealed with delight, racing to the window to test it out immediately. And then came the moment Daniel had been rehearsing in his mind, the one that had kept him awake night after night. He stood, his hand resting on the back of his chair, his voice low but steady. "Amara," he began, "I want to say something. Not just to you, but to Lily, and to myself." The room grew quiet. Amara's eyes locked on his, wary but attentive. "For too long," Daniel said, "I've lived behind walls. I thought shutting the world out would protect me, and protect my daughter. But those walls only kept us prisoners in our grief. When you walked into this house, Even under another name, you brought light. You brought laughter back to my child, and you brought warmth back to me. His voice cracked, but he pressed on. I repaid that gift with suspicion and pride. I pushed you away when you had done nothing but give, and in doing so, I hurt Lily. I hurt you. For that, I am truly sorry. The words hung in the air, raw and unpolished. For once, Daniel didn't sound like a CEO. He sounded like a man, broken, remorseful, hopeful. Amara's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. Not here, not in front of Lily, not with such honesty. Daniel reached into his pocket then and pulled out a small box. He opened it, revealing not a diamond or anything ostentatious, but a simple gold band. This is not about wealth or grandeur, he said softly. It's about a promise. A promise that this house will no longer be cold. A promise that Lily will have the family she deserves. And a promise that if you'll let me, Amara, I will spend every day proving my gratitude, not just with words, but with presence. Lily gasped, looking between them. Daddy, are you asking Miss Amara to stay forever? Daniel knelt beside his daughter, his hand trembling slightly as he held out the ring to Amara. Yes, sweetheart. That's exactly what I'm asking. For a long moment, Amara was silent. Tears filled her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. She looked at Lily, the child who had clung to her in the dark, who had laughed at her silly bedtime stories, who had whispered her name like a prayer. Then she looked at Daniel, the man who had been so lost in grief, now stripped of all defenses. Yes, she whispered finally. Yes, I'll stay. Lily squealed, throwing her arms around both of them. We're a family now. The three of them embraced, tears and laughter mingling. The balloons bobbed above them, the crooked paper cranes scattered across the table, the candles flickering against the walls. For the first time, the Harrington mansion wasn't just a house of stone. It was a home, alive, warm, and filled with love. The morning after Lily's birthday, the Harrington mansion no longer felt like the same house. The cold marble floors seemed softer, the high ceilings less imposing. Even the air carried a gentleness, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the laughter and refused to let it go. Daniel awoke not to silence, but to the sound of his daughter's giggles echoing down the hallway. He followed the sound and found Amara sitting on the floor with Lily in the library. Books scattered around them. They were building towers of paper cranes, stacking them as high as they could until Lily's laughter toppled them. Daniel leaned against the doorway, his chest tightening, not with grief this time, but with something lighter. Hope. Daddy! Lily called. Come help us! He smiled, stepping forward, rolling his sleeves as he knelt beside them. His hands were clumsy with the folds, but Lily cheered him on, and Amara's patient guidance made even his awkward cranes feel like treasures. It was such a small thing, 3 people folding paper on the floor of a mansion, but it felt monumental. It felt like family. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the Harrington estate transformed. The dining room, once a cavern of echoes, now rang with conversation. The garden, neglected for so long, bloomed again under Amara's touch and Lily's laughter. The study, once Daniel's fortress, became a place where Lily did her homework while Amara studied her medical texts, the two of them trading questions and encouragement. Daniel watched it all with quiet wonder. For the first time in years, he did not feel like a man guarding ruins. He felt like a father. He felt like a husband again, not in the sense of replacing his late wife, but in building something new, something rooted in healing, rather than loss. One crisp winter evening, as the 3 of them sat before the fireplace, Lily curled up between them with her rabbit. The flames painted their faces with warm light, and outside the windows, the first snow of the season drifted gently down. "Daddy?" Lily murmured sleepily. "Yes, sweetheart? Does this mean we're happy now?" Daniel swallowed hard, emotion pressing at his throat. He glanced at Amara, whose eyes shone in the firelight, steady and kind. "Yes," he whispered, kissing the top of Lily's head. "We're happy now, and we'll keep choosing happiness. Every day." Amara reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining softly. For so long she had carried others' burdens, her sisters, her patients, even Daniel's and Lily's. Now, for the first time, she allowed herself to rest in the warmth of being part of something whole. The days ahead weren't perfect. There were still nights when Lily woke from dreams of her mother, when Daniel's grief caught him unexpectedly, when Amara felt the exhaustion of balancing medical school and a new life. But imperfection no longer frightened them. They faced it together, with laughter, patience, and the quiet courage to keep moving forward. Months later, Amara stood in her white coat ceremony at Columbia, her name called as she walked across the stage. In the front row, Daniel and Lily sat hand in hand, their smiles brighter than any applause. When she looked at them, her heart swelled with gratitude, not just for the dream she was achieving, but for the family she had found in the unlikeliest place. That night, back in Westchester, the house glowed with life. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, vegetables, and cake left over from Amara's celebration. They ate at the long table, not as employer and maid, not as strangers bound by tragedy, but as a family that had stitched itself together from brokenness. As Lily cleared her plate, she looked up at them with the blunt honesty only children carried. "I think Mommy's happy now, because she can see us smiling again." Silence fell, but it was not heavy. It was reverent. Daniel reached across the table, squeezing his daughter's hand, then Amara's. "Yes," he said softly. "She can see us. And she is happy." Later that evening, Lily fell asleep under her ceiling of glowing stars, the crooked paper cranes still scattered across her nightstand. Daniel and Amara lingered at the doorway, their hands brushing, their hearts steady. For years, the Harrington mansion had been a symbol of wealth and sorrow. Now, it was something else entirely. A home. A place of second chances, of healing, of laughter that grew louder each day. As Daniel turned off the light and closed the door softly behind them, he whispered into the quiet hallway, "Sometimes love doesn't come when we expect it, but when it does, it makes everything whole again." Amara leaned her head against his shoulder. "And that's what makes it home." Together they walked down the hall, the sound of Lily's steady breathing behind them, the fire's glow waiting ahead. And the promise of tomorrow no longer frightening, but beautiful. The Harrington mansion was no longer cold. It was alive. It was theirs. Thank you, dear friends, for staying with this story until the very last page. If it warmed your heart, reminded you of the power of love, or simply gave you a moment of peace, then its purpose is fulfilled. If you'd like to walk with us in more healing journeys ahead, don't forget to subscribe, so we can keep sharing stories that light a little fire in the coldest nights. From my heart to yours, thank you, and see you in the next story.